It's time for the Pulse of Puget Sound. An eye on the issues that affect our community. The Pulse of Puget Sound. A public affairs presentation from KPLZ Seattle. Star 101.5.
Good morning. Welcome to the Pulse of Puget Sound. I'm Susan Michaels.
And I'm Rick O'Brien. Each week we take a look at issues that affect you here in the Puget Sound area. This week we're talking about earthquakes and safety.
Recently there were 2 earthquakes in the news, one in California and one in Bam, Iran. But the results were quite different. Why that difference and what could be in store for the Northwest?
Coming up, more on earthquakes and safety on the Pulse of Puget Sound.
Star 101.5.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared. It's like tiny nails in the air poke my lungs.
Did you know things like shower curtains, a blanket, even a teddy bear can trigger your child's asthma attacks? For the latest information, call 1-866-NO-ATTACKS or visit www.noattacks.org.
I don't want to feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Pulse of Puget Sound. I'm Susan Michaels.
And I'm Rick O'Brien. Today we're talking about earthquakes and safety.
With us is Bill Steele from the Seismology Lab at the University of Washington. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning.
Now, in less than a week, we saw 2 6.5 earthquakes, one in California and one in Iran. Is it normal to get multiple quakes around the world in a similar period of time?
Well, quakes of this magnitude occur many times during a year. It's just most often they're occurring in areas where they don't do a lot of damage. And so to have 2 in near very populated centers is a little unusual, but not very surprising.
Okay.
It seems I remember there being 3s where there'd be an earthquake someplace, and then within a matter of a month there'd be. Is that just coincidence, or does it work somehow like that?
Certainly in certain areas, like in California, when we had a magnitude 7 in the Mojave Desert, their strain was transferred to other faults in the area, and there was some sympathetic faulting that went on for months. So in that sense, you can say those were related. But on different parts of the world like this, no, I think it's more the way our mind processes this kind of information.
Okay, well, that makes sense. If they're in closer as far as locale, then that makes sense that they would maybe kind of trigger one
be
another one.
affecting each other, yeah.
Yeah, and these 2 quakes, they measured about the same, but there was a huge difference in the results.
Yeah.
Why is there such a difference?
Well, it really all comes down to building codes and construction methods. And in the United States, we have been a leader in the world, and in particularly California, in building earthquake-safe structures. And those that did fail in California were built before the more modern codes came into effect. They were unreinforced masonry. In BAM, unfortunately, we're dealing with very heavy adobe kind of construction with no reinforcement kind of holding those blocks together. So when shaken hard enough, they collapse catastrophically.
Wow. Okay.
And we're looking at probably over 30,000 dead and more on for the next 10 years. There will be more casualties related to this, either through disease or grief and just kind of doing without. So it's really quite a terrible disaster.
The last quake we had in this area that was of any size, actually we didn't have a whole lot of damage or injury or much of anything.
Well, we were tremendously lucky with the Nisqually earthquake in 2002. First of all, the shaking levels did reach a point where you start seeing significant damage in areas of soft soil around Seattle and Olympia. But generally speaking, the shaking just didn't reach those levels of about 10% G or greater, where you start seeing damage, and around 30% of the force of gravity in horizontal shaking. That's when you really start seeing the damage, and there are only a few spots where it reached that point. But if the shaking had gone on for a couple more seconds or a little bit stronger, we may have seen failures of structures like the Alaska Way Viaduct and others that would have certainly changed the picture.
Okay.
Now, I know we recently had a small quake, was that last week? How many quakes are recorded each year in the Northwest?
About 3,000 a year.
Quite a few.
Recorded by the PNS and the Pacific Northwest side.
Now,
do
most of those we don't feel at all?
Right. Most of those are below magnitude 1. I mean, the largest number, and then maybe about 10 out of every 10 magnitude 1s, you'll have a magnitude 2. Out of every 10 magnitude 2s, you may see a magnitude 3. So it's sort of like that. The smaller the magnitude, the much greater the frequency.
Okay. I know recently I received an email from someone mentioning something about information, that the Northwest quake danger is getting bigger, not smaller. Is that accurate? And how can you tell?
Well, the risk from earthquake damage, of course, really hasn't changed. It's just that we're aware now that our risk is higher than was once previously thought.
Okay.
I see.
I see.
Sometimes learning things can make you a little more uncomfortable, but yeah, we're finding that not only are there numerous shallow crustal faults, now unlike the Nisqually earthquake, which happened about 35 miles down under the earth, in this Juan de Fuca plate, this ocean slab that's subducting or sliding down beneath our continent. That's where the Nisqually quake happened, in that slab sliding beneath us and at quite a distance from the surface. Shallow crustal earthquakes, like we had in Iran and recently in California, can rupture right up to the surface. And in recent years, we've discovered at least 8 different, well, more than that, probably on the order of 15 fault scarps or displacement in the surface of the ground caused by shallow earthquakes in the greater Puget Sound region that occurred since the last glaciation about 10 to 15,000 years ago. So these are relatively young faults, and it really does spell bad news because these earthquakes can produce a really violent ground shaking.
Okay, so the shallow ones, the ones right near the surface, are the ones where you get to most of the shaking. Is it a different type of the shaking?
Well, it is. It'll have more high-frequency energy, which will impact short, stiff structures more, but it also has a much higher acceleration, or the force of that shaking can be much more violent. In Nisqually, for example, in downtown Seattle, we were somewhere around 10% of the force of gravity, 9% of the force of gravity in horizontal shaking on the firm ground. A Seattle fault earthquake could produce shaking in excess of 1G. So we're looking at 10 times more violent, the shaking. And so even well-built structures can be severely affected by this kind of shaking.
Yeah, I know the Nisqually shake. I remember it is not real violent. It was kind of a slow, where I was
rolling
anyway.
kind of
yeah,
motion.
Yeah.
And that again is that high frequency energy tends to get attenuated or absorbed by the earth as the waves move by. So as you get further away from the earthquake, you get more longer period waves and less of the high frequency kinds of waves. And so the feeling of the earthquake, that kind of rolling motion, is accentuated with a deep or distant earthquake compared to a shallow crustal one near you.
Are there things we shouldn't do?
Well, yeah, the first thing you shouldn't do is panic, obviously, and that's the first thing. It's our natural instinct to flee when we're frightened, and the important thing is to contain that. The other thing is to not be so afraid of earthquakes that you don't do anything about them. I mean, there's lots that we can do, simple things that will reduce damage to our property, make our homes safer and our workplaces safer, and also putting away food and water so that if the transportation system's disrupted or electricity's out and the stores aren't open, we can be comfortable for at least 72 hours. And that's 72 hours for every individual without food or water from another source. So we really need to be self-sufficient within our communities to give time for the emergency response community to bring in extra supplies. And it does take that 72 hours sometimes to do that.
All right, so we should check with Office of Emergency Management for tips on that, and we can check your website at pnsn.org for more information about earthquakes. Thank you, Bill, for being with us this morning on the Pulse of Puget Sound.
Thank you very much for calling.
So the key thing is being prepared. For more information about earthquakes, you can go to pnsn.org. And for information about being prepared, you can check with the Office of Emergency Management in King, Snohomish, or Pierce counties.
If you have a topic you'd like us to cover on the Pulse of Puget Sound, let us know. We'd like your input.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week with the Pulse of Puget Sound.
This has been another edition of the Pulse of Puget Sound. An eye on the issues that affect our community. We want to know what's on your mind. Just visit the feedback link at star1015.com. Tell us the issues you care about most, the topics you'd like us to discuss on the Pulse of Puget Sound. Visit star1015.com and click on the feedback link. And keep listening to Star 101.5.